Welcome to the debate. Quick housekeeping right at the top. Please hit like, subscribe, follow, and turn on that notification bell.
Yeah, definitely do that before we dive in.
Right? We also have a very brief update on the Martin Stevens versus OpenAI matter. Just to be completely clear, this is still not a lawsuit. We are currently in a voluntary quiet period, which was requested by Martin Stevens to sort of idle releasing new public information.
Right, and we should clarify that no settlement is known to be underway or even being discussed right now.
Exactly. And crucially, the dead man switch has not been activated, meaning Martin Stevens is safe on both physical and legal levels.
Good to know.
Yeah. So moving on to today's issue. We tend to think of the internet as, well, weightless. I mean, we literally call it the cloud. You ask an AI a question and the answer just kind of materializes out of the ether.
But that ether is actually made of steel and concrete, spinning fans, and frankly, millions of gallons of water. It's a massive humming factory sitting right on the edge of your town.
Exactly. Today, we are examining the explosive environmental footprint of AI data centers and the resulting collision with local communities. The core question we're looking at is this: are local regulatory bans and grassroots opposition the necessary checks to prevent environmental degradation from AI infrastructure?
Or on the flip side, do these blunt local moratorias risk stifling essential technological progress, especially while ignoring the industry's own capacity to adapt sustainably?
Right. And here's where I stand. Because of the massive resource consumption and some truly glaring regulatory loopholes, I argue that community-led resistance and strict local zoning are the only rational defenses we have left.
And I approach this from the perspective that while the physical footprint of AI is undeniably massive, the real solution lies in smart siting, advanced cooling technologies, and operational efficiency. Reactionary local bans just stall vital infrastructure.
Well, to understand why communities are panicking, you really have to look at the sheer scale of the transition. AI is no longer just a software concept, It's heavy industry.
Absolutely. The physical requirements are staggering.
Right. A recent Cornell University report laid it out clearly. By 2030, cooling these facilities could consume up to 1.1 billion cubic meters of water a year.
Which is a huge number.
It is. That is the equivalent of the annual water use of 10 million U.S. households. And because federal environmental laws have massive loopholes regarding how these centers operate, grassroots resistance is just stepping in to fill the void.
You mean the localized pushback we're seeing?
Yeah, we've seen activists, including prominent figures like Erin Brockovich, and local women leading the charge to successfully block or delay roughly $64 billion in data center projects. So this isn't just noise. It's a necessary corrective action to protect local ecosystems.
I hear those concerns, I really do, but that narrative of inevitable environmental ruin, it really ignores the engineering realities. If we look at that exact same Cornell study, it doesn't just sound the alarm.
Well, it certainly raises a massive red flag.
It does, but it also provides a roadmap. It shows that if we strategically build in low water stress regions, like the Midwest, Texas, or Montana, and we pair that with faster grid decarbonization and better cooling efficiency, we can actually slash water use by 86%.
Assuming they actually do that.
Right, but it shows it's possible. It cuts carbon impacts by nearly 3/4 too. So blanket bans like the recently vetoed moratorium in Maine on centers over 20 megawatts, they're a blunt instrument. They actively harm economic reinvestment. I mean, better cooling tech alone cuts another 7% of CO2. We cannot simply ban our way out of what is fundamentally an engineering challenge.
The problem with relying on engineering challenges is how that engineering actually operates in the real world, and specifically, the massive transparency gap hiding it. Let's talk about how these cooling systems actually work.
Okay.
As these facilities recycle water to cool their servers, a large portion of it evaporates. What's left behind is called blowdown water, and it is heavily concentrated with total dissolved solids, salts, and chlorides. Where does it go?
Usually municipal systems.
Exactly. They discharge it into municipal, publicly owned treatment works, or they pump it underground using Safe Drinking Water Act Class 5 injection wells.
Right, but those injection wells.
Wait, let me just finish this point. Because the mechanism here is so critical. Those Class 5 wells classify cooling water as non-hazardous, meaning they completely avoid strict monitoring. It's exactly like a chemical factory outsourcing its pollution accounting.
I think comparing it to a chemical factory is a bit of a stretch.
But the factory gets to say, look how clean our books are, while handing toxic sludge over to a small-town treatment plant that simply isn't equipped to filter out concentrated industrial solids. We're relying on voluntary corporate ESG reports, right? Yet companies like Amazon Web Services keep their specific withdrawal and discharge data a secret. You can't trust an industry to self-regulate when they're hiding the baseline data.
Look, you are taking the opaque practices of a few operators and painting the entire industry with the same brush. Some companies are absolutely leading the way in transparency.
Like who?
Well, Google, for instance, they publish highly detailed water metrics, they utilize independent accountant reviews, and they actively invest in aquifer recharge projects. And since you brought up Amazon, they actually plan to use reclaimed wastewater at 20 of their locations.
Reclaimed wastewater?
Yeah, that is a targeted engineering solution. They're taking water that has already passed through the municipal system, water that would otherwise just be discharged, and using it for cooling, rather than draining fresh, potable aquifers. That directly addresses water scarcity.
Wait, using reclaimed water somewhere in the future doesn't solve the immediate crisis. Google's aquifer recharge projects sound great on a corporate ESG report, but tell that to the families in Montour County, Pennsylvania, you know?
I know the situation in Montour County has been tense.
Extremely. Their private wells are pumping out brown, sediment-filled water today, right after a data center moved in next door. Because of this lack of transparent, localized data, communities are taking land use into their own hands. Erin Brockovich's crowdsourced map alone is tracking 33 operational and 44 under-construction AI centers.
Right, the community reporting map.
Exactly. With over 2,700 community reports highlighting severe water, e-waste, and noise concerns.
Well, the noise is definitely a massive quality of life issue, I'll give you that. Those cooling fans are essentially jet engines running 24/7 for nearby residents.
They are. And that's why Montour County citizens successfully organized to deny a rezoning plan. The pushback is so fierce that the Pennsylvania State Senate proposed a 3-year moratorium. And it's worth noting, women are disproportionately leading these environmental justice fights.
Because of the local impacts, right?
Yeah. A recent Gallup poll showed 55% of women strongly oppose these centers. They see the immediate, tangible threats to their family's health and local resources.
I fully acknowledge the validity of local concerns regarding noise and water depletion, but using local zoning bans as a weapon is NIMBYism. It's the not in my backyard reflex.
I wouldn't call protecting your drinking water NIMBYism.
But it is a completely blunt instrument. It's like trying to stop the internet by banning telephone poles in your neighborhood. The demand exists, so we must build smarter, not just stop building.
Except telephone poles don't consume 1 billion cubic meters of local drinking water. This isn't just passive infrastructure. It's a massive, localized resource drain.
It is a resource drain, yes. But the global demand for AI computation is there. It is not going away just because a county in Pennsylvania zones it out. That's why systemic solutions, like locating these centers in renewable-heavy states with low water stress, is how we actually solve the problem.
If they actually go there.
Right, but when local townships pass these blunt bans, they don't stop AI. They just rob their own struggling communities of vital tax revenues and the massive infrastructure investments that these tech giants bring with them.
Okay, well, if local bans are too blunt and voluntary ESG is a black box, then we have to look to the federal level. But right now, the federal government is actively greasing the wheels for tech giants.
How so?
Instead of stepping up oversight, federal executive orders are fast-tracking these centers by waiving standard environmental reviews under the Clean Water Act.
They're trying to expedite Section 404 permits to build faster, sure.
Right. They are basically treating a massive industrial cooling facility like it's a standard commercial office building. They expedite the permits to build faster, but completely ignore the operational oversight once the centers are running. Because federal action is falling so short, states and municipalities absolutely must use zoning laws, conditional permits, and grid upgrade fees. It is their only mechanism for survival.
But creating a chaotic patchwork of local overregulation threatens U.S. competitiveness in AI. We are in a global race. If the permitting process takes a decade here because every township wants a bespoke environmental review, these data centers will simply be built overseas.
Where standards are worse, you mean?
Exactly. Where environmental standards are practically non-existent.
I have to admit, I just don't understand the logic of letting them consume our local grids simply to stay competitive. I mean, are we supposed to just sacrifice local utilities for a global race?
No, not sacrifice. We need to integrate them smartly. And the idea that we can just force data centers to run purely on clean energy right now, while it ignores the fundamental physics of our electrical grid.
How do you mean?
Data centers require massive baseload power, meaning they need constant, 24/7 electricity to run those servers without interruption. Renewables like wind and solar are intermittent. Even with aggressive deployment, shifting to renewables will only cut AI-related emissions by maybe 15% by 2030, if the demand outpaces our ability to generate and store that clean energy.
Right, because of the storage bottleneck.
Exactly. So the true solution isn't adversarial zoning blocks. It's accelerating the clean energy transition in the exact places where AI is expanding and requiring cooperation with tech giants, forcing them to bring their capital to bear on our grid problems.
Well, here is where I stand after our discussion. Until these glaring federal loopholes regarding industrial water discharge are closed, and until we have true localized transparency, community-led moratoria, and strict zoning aren't just valid, they are vital. The people living next to these humongous facilities must have the ultimate say in how their local resources are consumed.
And my perspective remains that we must look at the macro picture. Technological innovation, operational efficiency, and smart strategic siting offer a proven roadmap to reduce these environmental impacts by over 80%. We can achieve sustainability, but we won't get there by stalling the critical infrastructure that drives global progress.
Well, we definitely converge on the reality that AI is no longer just a digital concept. It is heavy industry.
Yes, a massive physical reality.
And I think we both agree that current corporate transparency is inadequate. The sheer scale of water and energy consumption requires immediate serious intervention.
Absolutely. Balancing rapid technological advancement with local environmental health is an incredibly complex challenge. And the localized battles we've explored today are actively shaping the future of global AI infrastructure. There is a lot of nuance in this material, and we encourage listeners to really dive into the data to form their own conclusions.
Exactly. When you look up at the cloud, remember that it is deeply tethered to the ground. It has a foundation, it has exhaust, and it has a very real thirst. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share the show.